Well, good afternoon, everyone. We might as well get started. My name is Kevin Gunn. I'm the coordinator of digital scholarship here at Catholic University of America Libraries. I'm joined by my colleague, Michaela Champion, one of our graduate library professionals, who will be monitoring the chat for any questions. This workshop is being recorded and will be made available at a later date along with the slides. So this week is Open Access Week. I originally did this webinar back in 2018, and I thought I would revisit it this year because quite a few things have changed since then. A good idea to take a look at this and the issue of authors' rights and predatory publishing, as these are ongoing concerns. And authors do need to be vigilant in protecting themselves. So I thought it'd be good, worthwhile, and this is the great week to do this. So I come at this from three different perspectives. One is that as a librarian, I'm often asked questions by faculty and students about predatory publishing. You know, is this journal legit? How do I go about finding out that sort of thing? Secondly, as an editor, I'm the editor-in-chief for college and undergraduate libraries. It's a journal that's published by Taylor and Francis. So I'm familiar with the peer review process and the editorial process, and just looking at evaluating journal articles as they come in and that. Last, I'm also an adjunct faculty in the Department of Library and Information Studies here on campus, so I can see the perspective of the faculty and their need to get published as well. So I just thought I'd give you that background information. So our agenda today, sort of want to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you will. We'll start off with the ugly, predatory publishing, and I'm going to give you examples of journals, books, conferences, and even acceptance letters. I'll focus, most of my presentation will be focused on journals, but you should think of the larger idea of publishing in general. There's a lot of weird stuff happening out there. So that's the first thing we'll look at. The second thing is looking at, best practices for getting published. Looking at what you can look for before you go to be published with a particular journal, and what sort of homework you can do in making sure that you are an informed author. And then last, understanding your rights as an author, things that you should be aware of when you're talking with publishers. So let's get going. So, it's just stakeholders is much broader group than you would think. So for example, you have graduate students, they have or often have the pressure to publish early to get their name out there so they can start establishing their career. You have new faculty who also fall in this camp as well. They have the pressure to publish or perish. So they have that going for them. Tenured faculty, they have the desire to continue to publish, and they often sit on PhDs committees and that sort of things. So they have to be aware of journals that are reputable and journals that are not so reputable. You have editors. You have to be careful with editors. There was a group did a study, a sting operation in 2017. They created a false editor profile and they sent it out to 300 journals. And out of those 340 journals accepted the fake profile without doing any background check on that. So you really have to be vigilant in evaluating information as you move through the publishing process. Next, you have librarians. Librarians get questions from faculty and students, so we have to step up and offer informed opinions. about various topics. You also have professionals who are not necessarily in academia. So, social workers, our example, nurses and that working in the field, they often have to publish as well. So they need to be informed of this. And then you have institutions in general. A lot of the article processing charges, the APCs, if you will, they have to be vigilant too. A lot of universities will have funds for this, and they'll have requests from faculty. So they got to make sure that the money is going towards legitimate, good quality journals and publishers, and not predatory publishers. So talking about the mentality of stakeholders, sort of fall in three general areas here, just to make you aware of. Just plain naive, you're starting out as your career, you may not know about all this. So one of the great things is having a workshop like this sort of gets you to begin to understand what's happening out there in the publishing field. You really don't know what you don't know. So being naive can cost you. There's also an element of desperation. A lot of times, you are under the pressure, to publish or perish, to get your name out there in that. So sometimes authors will just go with a publisher who's, hey, readily available for you, but that may not be the best way to go. And then there's knowingly disingenuous, as I put in here. When I first started doing these workshops, this particular workshop a few years back, I thought, oh no, faculty, especially tenured faculty, are being taken advantage of, and this and that. But I soon learned that actually there are tenured faculty who willingly publish in predatory periodicals. Think about that for a bit, they knowingly publish. So that is a increased concern of scholars and the publishing field as well. And I'll actually give you an example of that moving forward. All right. So what is predatory publishing? So it's not so much a journal practice, that sort of thing, so as it is a dealing with deceptive business practices. So you have elements of opportunism, exploring the publishing needs of someone, and generally they have no interest in research outcomes. So if you want to think of it as, predatory publishers are those who lie about their business practices for the purpose of attracting paying authors. So these journals misrepresent themselves with regards to, for example, editorial board members. They claim people are on their editors and that, but they do that without permission. You have peer review practices where they falsely claim to provide meaningful peer review, and they really don't. Impact metrics, they'll have impact metrics on their website and that, which is supposed to impress you, but they don't really, the numbers don't really mean anything. There's organizational affiliations, which they usually claim a relationship with a non-existent organization, for example. So the common feature of these journals is that instead of rigorously evaluating and vetting submitted articles, they will instead publish anything as long as the author is willing to pay an article processing charge. And by injecting these non-vetted content in the scholarly and scientific marketplace, and misrepresenting it as peer-reviewed science, so these journals end up contaminating, undermining both legitimate and trustworthy journals and scholarly discourse. So it is a bit of a problem. So where did predatory publishing originate? It originally came out of the open access movement, the idea of publishing something open access, making it freely available, and that you pay a small fee or something like that. It really, how should I say, open the door for predatory publishers to come in and exploit that. So, the business model has changed. Libraries used to have subscribers to, we used to subscribe to many journals, we still do, and we'd pay that fee there. The university usually did that, by the way. And then the articles in the journal would be made available for you, the author, and the community, and that sort of thing. So now it's shifted to authors paying to be published. So usually have author publishing fees, the charges, APFs, or the article processing charges will come out of that. So predatory publishing is the larger picture here. It can be journals, monographs, conferences, and acceptance letters, even acceptance letters. So I'll give you an examples of those. So how do you know when you're looking at a predatory journal? Well, you don't off the top. You got to look for multiple red flags. And just because a particular website, for example, may have a red flag doesn't mean it's a predatory journal. So you have to be very careful when you're evaluating content out there. So, there's obvious criteria. You have listed here, falsely claiming a number of things, everything from providing peer review to editorial oversight, affiliations with various scholarly and scientific organizations, affiliation with a non-existent organization, naming reputable scholars to editorial boards without their permission, and then refusing to remove them when they're called out on it. There's also false claim to have high journal impact factor, which raises a perception of prestige when in fact it doesn't often mean anything. Hiding information about APCs until after the author has completed submission. And that's I'll give you an example of that in a bit. Then falsely claiming to be included in prestigious indexes. So a lot of times these journals will get into a prestigious index. The company running the index will discover this and then boot them out, but there'll still be remnants of records within that index. And I've come across those as well. So what has happened? Just a quick overview. There's a librarian several years ago by name John Beal. He created Beal's List. You may have heard of it. I won't get into the details. It shut down in 2017. It had various issues and problems with it. But what came out of that was Cabell's directory. They decided to pick up that list, that blacklist, if you will, and they have listed on their website a whole bunch of criteria that you can evaluate, that you can use to evaluate whether a journal that you're examining is worthwhile. And there's 64 criteria. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I could point out, these different things about integrity. For example, if an article appears more than in one journal, that's a red flag right there. You have peer review. So, if you're checking a website out and they don't list the editorial board or no editors and that sort of thing, that's possibly a red flag right there. Especially on their website. You can look at publication practices. So the journal publishes papers that are not academic at all. So they could be essays by lay people, for example, in that. Under indexing and metrics, you have quite often they'll point out the concept of an impact factor that's not really related to Thomson Reuters notion of the impact factor. They're the ones that have basically copyright or trademark that name. So it doesn't really mean anything outside of Thomson. You also have fees. So quite often the publisher will be a little over-focused emphasis on paying fees. That's usually a red flag there. Under access and copyright, they may claim journals completely open access, but not all articles are openly available. So that's something. And of course, there's no way to access said articles as well. And then there's a general issue of business practices. as I mentioned, you could ask them to stop sending emails, that sort of thing, but they still do it. No subscribers or nobody uses the journal. These are little clues and red flags that you should be aware of. So, like I said, 64 criteria is way too much. So here are 13 characteristics that you can take a look at that Larissa Shamser has pointed out. Everything from the scope of interest includes non-biomedical subjects, alongside biomedical topics. That's you would think that would not be an issue, but there's stuff like that out there. And that includes conferences too, and I'll give an example of that in a bit. Website has spelling and grammar errors. You'll have images that are distorted or fuzzy or look like they were cut and paste from something else. The homepage language will target authors specifically. This notion of the index Copernicus values promoted on the website, and I just shrug my shoulders. What are they talking about with regards to that? The description of the manuscript handling process is lacking. The manuscripts requested to be submitted via email. That's a red flag there. So many legitimate journals out there use things like Scholar One, if you're publishing with Francis and Taylor and Francis, I should say, and and other publishers use similar items as well. You have rapid publication is often promised. There is no retraction policy, which is for me very much a red flag. Information on whether and how journals will be digitally preserved is absent. How is it going to be preserved moving forward? What is the processing publication charge? Do journals claim to be open access either retain the copyright of published research, or do they fail to mention copyright? And then my favorite is the contact email address is a non-professional address. So things that you can take a look at. So let's get into some examples of journal examples of predatory publishing here. So take a look at this site, this page here, and ask yourself, okay, what sort of red flags comes up here when you look at this particular journal? So I'll leave it up here for a few seconds and take a look at it. All right, so I've mentioned a number of things right off the bat. So I pointed some arrows here, but things to consider, where is it indexed? There's things here that don't appear, these databases don't appear to exist. The NCBI, sure, but it's not the US National Library. It's something very basic, that sort of thing. They mentioned EBSCO host, which is not strictly indexed there. I mean, it is indexed in databases and that, but it is somewhat inaccurate to point that out. Definitely part of the platform, but not per se. You look on the side here, you'll have advertisements. So for example, here you have a financial advertisement for a journal of engineering. Well, it seems kind of odd that you would have that listed there. One of the tell signs for me as an editor, if you look at the next three arrows, look at the submission deadline. It's the middle of the month, September. Accepted notifications after 1 week of paper submission. Really? And then the paper is published a couple weeks after that. So you have within 15 days going from submission to publication. My particular journal, once I've done my preliminary edits of it, I send it back to the author so they can accept it. Once they return it, I send it out for peer review, And peer review takes up to 4 weeks, and some of my reviewers take up to 4 weeks. Once that's done, it's sent back to me. I say, oh, good, you've accepted it, great, or rejected it. Then I send it back to the author. Then the author turns around and makes the necessary corrections, asks any questions, and sends it back in. Then we go from there. And if they've made the necessary corrections, I accept it for publication. So there's a process, and that process takes time. So a quick 2-week turnover seems very, very odd. So looking at this website, Journal of Nursing Science, or wait a minute, is it the Journal of Nursing Sciences? Very interesting. So which one is it? So I started doing a little bit of research on this particular journal, and I noticed a particular, I looked at the faculty listed on here, and I thought, and they had, fuzzy images, that sort of thing, typos for various bios. And I thought, well, this is kind of weird. So I actually reached out to one of the people on the editorial board, one of the doctors here, and I reached out to her and I just mentioned that, do you, are you part of this? Are you part of this journal? And I did some research on her. She had her CV up on the web. So I looked at that and I compared with what was on the website, and it differed. And she had, I noticed that there wasn't any mention on her CV with regards to working at Arizona State University, for example. And so I contacted her and explained the situation, and she reached out to me, but she came back, she said she's never worked at ASU and was not on the editorial board of this journal. So just by me being a little bit curious and asking some questions, I discovered that someone had, that this practice is actually quite real. And I didn't have to look hard in order to do this. So it makes you wonder how many of you faculty are tuning in today, whether your name and bio is on some journal out there and you're unaware of it. So here's my particular journal. I'm the editor for college and undergraduate libraries. And you'll notice, just to do a compare and contrast, it lists the various abstracts and indices listed here. I noticed too that they list EBSCO host here as well. So I thought that was kind of odd. But you can see a lot of the particular databases as well as the publishers are listed here. On the right-hand side, you have an advertisement for Routledge, but that's okay because Routledge is owned by Taylor and Francis as well, including this particular journal. So it's all sort of connected. It's related in that particular way. I should mention that there was a faculty member had submitted, a good example here, what you can get, problems you can get into. He had submitted an article to a predatory publisher journal, and it was accepted. Hey, quelle surprise. And then they turned around and asked him for a processing fee. And, there's no discussion about that up to that point. So naturally, he refused. And now here is the article is now being held hostage by the predatory journal. And he's like, oh no, what can I do here? So he ended up reaching out to the Committee on Publishing Ethics, COPE, C-O-P-E. And they met and they decided, how can we make this work? So they agreed with the advice of the former editor-in-chief. There was no copyright transfer. He had not signed away his copyright to the predatory publisher. So he could go ahead and publish in a legitimate journal with an editorial note on the paper explaining what had happened. So otherwise, if the legitimate journal publisher wasn't going to accept it, then he would have had to write this off to experience and lessons learned. So this is one of the things that faculty and authors can find themselves getting in trouble with. So it's better to research it and find out who the legitimate publishers are. All right, so a monograph example of predatory publishing. So I don't know about you, but I do get these vanity presses that'll contact me and they'll say, hey, you can do a particular chapter for a book by an established author. It can be very much legitimate, but you have to delve further. There are vanity presses out there that'll, ask you, hey, why don't you get your dissertation, undergraduate thesis, honors thesis, we can publish that for you. It doesn't cost you very little, that sort of thing. So there is that notion of vanity presses out there. I've had odd requests. For example, I have an old blog that's been defunct for many years now, and I've had requests for that. Hey, why don't you take that and get it published? I'm like, why? What would be the point? I've been asked also for syllabi to do that as well. So there's a lot of people out there trying to turn a buck with a lot of information that you create. So you have to be careful. There's also a notion of conferences. Since I guess 2017, predatory conferences now outnumber official events, which is pretty amazing. So one example is the World Academy of Science, Engineering, and Technology. They held 183 events back in 2018. And that's quite a lot for one particular society to do that. I can give you an example of a UK cybersecurity worker who attended an international conference on political psychology in Copenhagen. So when he got there, he shared his experiences. He said, the proceedings were compressed into 2 hours on the first morning and 1 hour on the second morning, and barely 10 people showed up. He said, this was held in a single small room. He said the topics include everything from solar energy, robotics, Islamic finance, and food safety, among other things. So that's one of the telltale signs of a predatory conference, is when they have a whole bunch of topics that are unrelated to each other. This has serious ramifications because in this particular case, the worker lost his registration fee of, I think it was 450 euros at the time, his plane tickets to Denmark, and 2 nights accommodation as well. So he was not reimbursed by his employer because of it. So that's something to consider as well. Now, even here, you have idea of an acceptance letter. So for example, you have these letters here that Scholarly Kitchen put out in 2018, just to give you examples of how letters are written. And they'll come in and they'll look at this one here, cross-ref listed here. They'll have the ASCE up at the top there. It all looks so legit, but it's not. So what happens is that they'll reach out to a faculty member or a grad student, whenever, say, hey, you can get published in here. They'll send an email and they'll say, hey, you can get published in here. So they go through the process and they take the article. And then what happens is the graduate student or faculty member will, inquire about why their publication wasn't published. And they'll respond. Like one fellow, he responded, said, your acceptance letter said we published in the December issue. I haven't seen it yet. I'm just inquiring. And the thing is, he sends that reply not to the fake editor, but he sends it to the real editor of the journal. And the real editor of the journal goes, what are you talking about? We have not received or been in contact with you at all. So these folks will come and take your money and leave. So that's something to consider. So why do authors publish in predatory journals? Well, you have scholars in the developing world feel that Western journals might be prejudiced against them and feel more comfortable publishing in journals from the developing world. That is a complicated scenario. Definitely, there are countries out there that publish in the developing world, if you want to say that have good quality journals. And also the converse is that in developed countries, thank you very much, there are predatory publishers as well. There's predatory publishers in the United States, for example. But there's definitely a question of social identity moving forward with regards to that. There's an unawareness, for example, but would publishing anyway, if their institution recognized the journal, that would be an issue too. You also have the high pressure, of publishing or perishing. So people will publish wherever they can. Then there's a lack of research proficiency, in how to go about selecting a good journal. Can also often get you in trouble. So solutions to predatory practices. You have blacklists and whitelists. I mentioned Cabell's directory. So those are good to look up. Stakeholders need to step up. You need to take more involvement in your research and where it goes. And it's also a question of educating yourself about how you can avoid these predatory publishers. So here's another article from the Scholarly Kitchen by Alice Meadows about illegitimate journals and how to stop them. So everything from researchers self-educating, academic institutions and libraries providing support. Happy to have a conversation with any of you on that. Funders need to do audits to make sure that they're funding legitimate research. Looking at legitimate journals, the increasing transparency in publishing practices. So for example, you have open peer review would be one thing. Looking at the directory of open access journals is another one. There are regulatory bodies out there that can adopt policies and plans for publication in legitimate journals. And then there's also patients and the public, before participating in research, you seek assurance that the resulting publication will not be published in a predatory journal. So that is something that applies a lot to the medical field, especially with regards to institutional ethics boards and that. So it's not always easy for this. So there's the case of Derek Pine, who's an economics professor at Thompson Rivers University in British Columbia. And he was doing some research on publishing in his field. And he decided to look at his colleagues in his department. And he was horrified to find that, 15 of the 30 faculty in his department had published in predatory journals. Now, he used Beale's list, which has been discontinued for various reasons. But he found that 15 of 30, and then one had 10 articles published in that. So he brought that to attention of the faculty and I guess the department head or the dean. And consequently, he was suspended without pay and banned from campus. That was July 2018. I don't know if he's still teaching there now or if he's moved on, but that's an indication that maybe the power brokers, if you will, don't want to know about this. So it's something to think about. So what's the solution? The problem of predatory publishing is a problem of information literacy. So evaluating the credibility of a publisher or a journal is a particular exercise in evaluating the credibility of an information source. So we as librarians, we definitely have a role in letting people know about predatory publishing and how to solve the problem. So, what is my motivation and goal is probably the first step one should ask. Do I just want to get published? Is it laissez-faire publishing? Do I just publish wherever I want to. Do I have an interesting topic I want to be better known? In which case you may want to go with, a legitimate journal for that. Do I desire to be acknowledged for my research? Am I doing a first hire here? Am I working on tenure, or am I working on promotion? Some faculty are not interested in author's rights or putting the article in a repository. So library will have a copy, or student can get a copy through interlibrary loan, sort of laissez-faire publishing, if you want to call it that. All right, so be aware of your rights as an author. So you have to ask yourself questions, how does the publisher treat authors? So we already talked about predatory practices. You want to look at possibly what sort of publishing agreements do they have? Do they have a pre-print policy or post-print policy? Can you publish your article on your blog or in your institution's institutional repository? Questions like that you do need to ask. You also have open access. Philosophically, do you care about open access? I have friends who have refused to publish in college and undergraduate libraries for a particular digital humanities issue that I did a few years back because of the high article processing charges. So something to consider. You sort of, what are your values with regards to open access? So negotiating your publishing agreements. So you have to ask questions, what do you want to be able to do with your work? Think it through to the end. It gets published, where can you put it? How do you get the word out? What legal rights does the publisher need to publish your work? They may ask for a lot more than they necessarily need, but they do need a minimum, to make sure it's worthwhile for them to publish your article. What legal rights is the publisher asking for in the contract? So you definitely have to read the contract. You can negotiate the language in the contract so that it represents what you want, not just what the publisher wants. And in fact, there's an organization out there called SPARC, Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition. And they are an open access advocacy group, and they're there to help you. And one of the things that they do is that they have an author addendum that you can download from their website that you can give to publishers and say, I want to retain these rights. Now, the publisher may come back and say, well, no, not necessarily. But they have generally been more receptive in the past few years. So it's worthwhile having a conversation with the publisher and seeing what they're willing to get you to. So you're looking for finding the right journal. How do I go about doing that? Well, there's a number of ways that you can do. You can always look at the citations in your manuscript. Usually if something's published in a legitimate journal, it'll cite itself good quality journals in generals, okay? Obviously there are going to be exceptions to that, but something that you can take a look at what journals that would be relevant to your particular topic that you've written. You can ask faculty and colleagues and friends, where do they publish? There's a website out there called Think, Check, Submit. We'll get to it in a second. There's journal table of contents where you can look at the contents of a journal and say, oh yeah, that's right up my alley. That's something where I can go to. There's a Sherpa and Romeo website, which gives you help in working you through the self-archiving process if you want to do that. There's a directory of open access journals that you can check out. There's also, you can do research on article processing charges. Do they charge anything? If they do, is it kind of prohibitive? Things like that. You can look at alt metrics that are out there, especially by Clarivate. And then there's traditional sources you can look at, like Cabell's directory. So first one I'd like to mention here is this site here. Identify trusted publishers for your research. So Think, Check, Submit is very good. Place to start. You can look at the journal table of contents. They keep adding more and more material to this journal, so it's really quite good. They're up to 31,000, over 31,000 journals, and 15,000 open access. So it's a good place to start. 11,000 are hybrid journals. All right. Sherpa Romeo. The Sherpa and Romeo stand for long acronyms. Sherpa stands for Securing a Hybrid Environment for Research, Preservation, and Access. And Romeo is the rights metadata for open archiving. So fancy names for that. So you can go in, take a look, type in your journal title, and see what you have available to you. So I just did college and undergraduate libraries here, and it lists what you can do with submission versions, accepted versions, and published versions. So sometimes it'll vary, so you have to do your homework. There's a directory of open access journals, which you can check here. They continue to be more and more popular. 18,000 journals are listed. They have 12,000 journals without APC. So if that's a big thing for you, then that's something that you can restrict your searching to. They have 8 million article records. Like I said, when I did this webinar 4 years ago, they only had 3 million. So I mentioned that because that has totally exploded in just the past 4 years. So there's definitely open access movement is gaining steam. When you're on a website, here's a particular one for International Journal of Chemical Engineering. You can check out, find that page where they have article processing charges. It should be fairly transparent, just to make sure. Clarivate is a big company. They have a service called Insights, where you can look and see, what journals have the biggest impact, which ones people publish the most often in, what's their acceptance rates, all these wonderful things that you can use, some of the alt metrics to make an informed decision on that. We used to have it through the Web of Science, but we no longer do. We had to cancel our subscription, but I just want to let you know it is out there. And don't forget, there are traditional sources. You have Ulrich's International Periodicals Directory. They're online with the Global Series Directory, where you can go and search it and gain information about the journal that way, how many people subscribe to it, for example. Cabell's Directories of Publishing Opportunities. They have so many directories on particular subjects and that you can definitely go in and inform yourself. You can have subject-specific directories. For example, I mentioned the MLA directory of periodicals. That's something that you can take a look at and see how that, the information and check out how it's updated and that sort of thing. And plus, for legitimate publishers, you can always go to the publisher journal homepage and take a look at what they have listed there as well. So, the conclusion for this webinar is essentially that, you got to do your homework. Talk with your fellow faculty or your professor if you're a student, your colleagues. You can talk with your liaison librarian at your institution. You can talk with me, the coordinator of digital scholarship here at Catholic University. You can check out the Publisher Journal website. You can even go email the editor of the journal and ask them questions. All is welcome in that regard. There we go. So in the end, it's about making sound decisions so that you can make an impact with your research. And that's the presentation for today. I've got some helpful website links here I'll be sending the slides out with the recording, so you don't have to write anything down right now. And some more sources there. So I'll now open it up to any questions that we have. Anyone's interested? Asking questions, go right ahead. Well, we're not having too many people asking, so that's fine. Yeah, if you do have a follow-up, you can always contact me. My email is Gunn, Gunn, @cua.edu. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. And we will talk to you soon, hopefully. Bye-bye.